the Seahawkers podcast. I'm Brandon Schultz with the Military Seahawkers, and this week on episode 254, it's July, and every year around this time we start checking in with our NFC West rivals to see what changes have been made since last season. And this week, we're talking Arizona Cardinals with Bo Brack of the Locked On Cardinals, and Bo also works for Fox Sports 910 in Phoenix. Bo, how you doing?
Doing great. Glad to be with you, Brandon.
Yeah, I'm glad we could make this work. This, it's been hard in previous seasons trying to find a Cardinals fan just to come on the show. So I'm glad we could make this work.
That's I don't know how to take that, but it's certainly after the 2018 season. If there were some out there, they kind of ended up going and hiding. It's like the old meme of Homer Simpson just drifting back into the bushes there. But Cardinals fans, I think that they're going to emerge out of the woodworks, and this season should be exciting, if anything. But you're right, 2018 was rough as it's been in a long time, and it hasn't been an easy go since they moved everything to west from St. Louis to Phoenix. But I think that a lot of people are are cautiously optimistic as far as the new contingent of Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray.
Well, I'm hoping for some optimism because that's part of the problem is that last year I brought on Drew Butler, the former punter for the Arizona Cardinals, and he projected like a 4-win season for the Cardinals. And, he ended up being pretty close to being right. But I didn't want that kind of pessimism on the show again this year. So I'm hoping now with Kyler Murray at the helm of the Arizona Cardinals that maybe we can have a little bit more optimism among Cardinals fans.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how his game translates to the NFL. If Steve Keim, the general manager, was able to accomplish and turn this roster over enough to get enough depth to equal or kind of narrow the margin between losses and wins. 3-13, that was just a monumental failure as far as roster building is concerned, as far as decisions were made, whether it was the front office or during games in Steve Wilks, and the Cardinals decided to make the move at head coach, and they're going to bring in the offensive guru in their eyes, and Cliff Kingsbury. And we'll see. I mean, I got to assume that if you make the right decision at the quarterback position, that's going to make a big-time difference as far as trying to move out of the cellar of the NFC West. But, it's a kind of a huge swing for the fences here to see Kyler Murray's going to be a boom or he's going to bust. I really don't think that there's going to be any kind of in-between here between him and Kingsbury.
Interesting that you think it could be that much of a swing. And let's preview a little bit because the Seahawks, their first meeting is in week 4 in Arizona. And then we don't see the Arizona Cardinals again until they come to CenturyLink in week 16. Neither of those are in prime time because the only prime time game the Cardinals have is a Thursday night game against the 49ers. But I suppose that's what you get when you go 3-13.
Sure, yeah. I mean, and there are only 2 of those 3 wins were against San Francisco. And, and last year they were just an embarrassment on prime time. What was it, a 45-10 loss to the Denver Broncos? It ended up in the demise of offensive coordinator Mike McCoy. And it's really interesting to see where we are now as opposed to last year. And you had Sam Bradford at this point, your starting quarterback, with the offensive coordinator Mike McCoy, and Al Holcomb's your DC. Steve Wilks, as I mentioned, was your head coach, and this roster was, Butler had nailed it. Most of the national media had nailed last season. Everybody had seen it. The local media really weren't buying that this team was going to be that bad. I think that they knew that there's probably going to be a step back from the Bruce Arians era where he was able to win more than any other coach in the history of this franchise. But I don't think anybody truly envisions things being as bad as 3-13, but they certainly were. And a lot of that falls on the shoulders of Steve Keim and his inability to make impactful draft selections, especially at the top of the draft. I mean, his first round swings have been misses, and it's certainly shown as far as the product on the field.
Well, how does general manager Steve Keim, how does he keep his job after so many coaching changes? He's still allowed to hang in there and pick another coach, this time going with Kingsbury.
Yeah, and especially, last July, Steve Keim was pulling a DUI.
Right.
It was an extreme DUI, and it was an embarrassment, a black eye to the franchise. And President, CEO Michael Bidwell decided that he was going to retain Keim, and he was going to, of course, Keim had to pay a hefty fine in the six-figure area, and then he also was he was suspended from the complex for making any moves during a pretty crucial time as far as training camp through preseason. He wasn't even allowed to go to the facility, so that was huge as far as handicapping this franchise going into this pretty key season where they were going to change the face of the franchise with Josh Rosen at the time, and they couldn't really make any moves. They were kind of handcuffed a little bit. And Keim kept his job then, and then he kept his job after this just failure of a 3-13 season. But I think a lot of it falls on since Bidwell took over in 2006. And Keim's been with this organization since, the late 90s, 1999 actually, so 20 years. Everything that Bidwell knows as far as team building is mostly from Steve Keim. So I think that's going to be something that if he is pressed to move forward and move on from Steve Keim, that it's going to be a tough divorce between those two because everything Bidwell knows has been learned from the big guy in Steve Keim. So I think he kind of just has his ear and has Bidwell's confidence that this is going to change and that this is kind of just an anomaly in Steve Keim's tenure that's actually been pretty successful as far as the Cardinals franchise in Phoenix is concerned.
Well, Keim has been very busy this offseason. I'd be hard-pressed to find a Cardinals fan who can name 5 players who are still on the team from last season. If you exclude Larry Fitzgerald, David Johnson, and Patrick Peterson, just even those 3 guys, 5 more players beyond that, you're going into your deep hardcore fans, I think.
Yeah, you know what? And that's right, and that's how it should be, right? And I think that this organization made sure of it, that there was not going to be a lot of carryover from 18 to 19, that the 2018 part of the franchise encyclopedia is pretty much just ripped out and not remembered because it was that bad. And there has been so much turnover as far as the Cardinals had ample cap space to pretty much make any move that they wanted to make. I mean, it wasn't the Browns, it wasn't the Jets amount of cap space, but it was enough to make some improvements. And I think that Steve Keim kind of went more of a savvy way of trying to save some money and spread that wealth a little bit more. He spent some money on Jordan Hicks, the linebacker, but for the most part, he was picking up some guys in the bargain bin, some guys that you got to kick the tires on and see if they have anything left, like the Robert Alfords, who was released by the Falcons before free agency. I think that was a savvy pickup and finally filled the void opposite Patrick Peterson in the cornerback position. But, we'll see. I think that this was an offseason where it'd be tough not to improve your roster with the cap space, with the high draft selections that they had, with the number 1 waiver priority. They just had everything kind of in their corner to improve. Will that turn out to be the case? That remains to be seen. But I think on paper, they certainly added depth in some crucial areas.
Well, hey, some of those bargain bin players that you went after were some former Seahawks, and J.R. Sweezy brought in to fill that left guard position, and we end up getting Mike Iupati out of the deal, so we just swapped guards. You guys paid, though, 2 years, $9 million for Sweezy. We got Iupati for 1 year, $2.7 million. You guys get maybe a couple years younger at the position, and then you get backup quarterback Brett Hundley. So at least I'm assuming he's going to be a backup quarterback because, gosh, as an Oklahoma fan, I have to assume that Kyler Murray is going to be able to beat out Brett Hundley.
Yeah, I don't think that, in the rare case, even when we saw it with Baker Mayfield going number 1 overall, Tyrod Taylor had the leg up, at least to start the season last year. This is not the case. I mean, this is a little bit different. This is a different case, really, than any other, number 1 overall selection or first round quarterback where Kyler was Kingsbury's guy. I mean, that was about as transparent as anything goes in the NFL. And he's going to be his guy. He's going to be his ride or die, and he's going to start, first play and hopefully continue throughout the season. Hundley is going to be, he grew up in Phoenix. He played at Chandler High School, and he was a guy that it was kind of cool little nod to bring back a hometown kid, as well as Terrell Suggs, who comes back to the place where he played high school, and he played at Arizona State, and he starred there, and then he had 16 huge seasons for the Baltimore Ravens. Is he still an impact player? That remains to be seen, but he's certainly going to have the impact in the locker room. But as far as the Seahawks that they brought over, I don't mind Hundley. I think he is who he is now at this point in his career, where he's going to be a backup. He's going to accept that role. He's going to push Murray to where he's going to have to at least be a starter quality quarterback. And then J.R. Sweezy, you mentioned kind of the difference between him and Upati as far as the salary is concerned, but I think that was a move that had to be made. If you're going to make that trade straight up kind of, I know that they just signed on free agent deals, you would swap Upati for Sweezy. And I think Sweezy kind of has a Swiss Army knife type player who can play most of the positions on the line, add some versatility, add some depth. You get younger. Upati, he signed a big deal from San Francisco here originally. He was great, and then some injuries. He kind of just fell off a cliff. So I think it was just a good mutual parting of ways between the Cardinals and Upati, and then bringing in Sweezy. I like the move. I mean, you never know with the offensive lines. It's kind of like a bullpen in baseball. Sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't and goes horribly wrong like last year.
Well, let's go back to quarterback and Kyler Murray, because you mentioned the competition, especially with the Baker Mayfield and Tyrod Taylor with the Browns. There was some competition there. Does that concern you at all now that there isn't, maybe that veteran quarterback? Do you kind of wish that a guy like Sam Bradford were maybe around to be more competition for Kyler as opposed to just competing with a guy you can predict that he's going to beat out?
Sure. I hate to say this to a Sooner fan like yourself, but I don't think Bradford adds any competition to anybody or any quarterback room at this point in his career. I mean, that was just a failed experiment last year. Bradford was able to kind of fool one more team into paying him a lot of money to play the quarterback position just when he just didn't have it. I think he was just a little gun shy after so many serious injuries to his legs. He had the shoulder injury that he suffered in college, and I think he suffered it again one more time in the pros. So he was just banged up, injury riddled Sam Bradford, and unfortunately it just didn't work out. As far as having a veteran presence at the quarterback position, I would say, looking at the Cardinals coming off a 3-13 season and the infusion of young players, that this is more of a developmental season. And if that's the case, then you don't necessarily need a guy. You don't want a guy who's kind of who he is at the quarterback position, maybe a Mike Glennon, or as you mentioned, Bradford. I just don't think that benefits anybody for him to kind of push the envelope to start and take away reps from Kyler Murray. This year is all about Kyler Murray acclimating to the NFL level, seeing if he can transition from being a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback at Oklahoma and succeeding in being that number one pick that the Cardinals envisioned doing it. And it's just kind of one of those things where they're going to sink or swim.
And hey, look, you don't have to apologize to me about being a Sooners fan with regard to Sam Bradford, because any love that I had for Bradford, it was lost after he went to the Rams and then went to the Cardinals. There was far more years with those two teams than he was with the Sooners. So I've moved on, but I am a little bit torn up that you guys took Kyler Murray with the first pick overall. I kind of wanted Nick Bosa to go to that number one spot overall, because then it would have screwed 49ers fans, and Kyler Murray wouldn't have ended up as an Arizona Cardinal, and I would have been a lot more okay rooting for him for another team than I am rooting for him as a Cardinal.
Yeah, and it would have been interesting to kind of see where he would have fallen. How far would have Murray fallen in the draft if he didn't go to the Cardinals? Because you didn't hear a lot of storylines or connections from other teams to Murray. It was just basically the Cardinals, and that was it. And, I was actually with you as far as Bosa in the Niners. It was just like, are you going to gift wrapped a rival in your division in the 49ers exactly what they wanted? And that was tough for me to kind of swallow. You look at Quinnen Williams as well, and those were, the trio of guys that you were legitimately kind of previewing and looking at and kind of thinking that the Cardinals could potentially take one of those three players, and they decided to go with the quarterback and really gift Cliff Kingsbury his quarterback that he's wanted since he's recruiting Kyler Murray out of high school when he was the head coach at Texas Tech.
Well, and it had to be a tough move, too, for a guy like Keim to make, who just picked Rosen last year. Fortunately, you do get the second-round pick out of the Dolphins in the deal, but do you think they could have done better?
You would have thought so, right? Because of the controllability that you had as far as Josh Rosen. And I mean, this as covering the Seahawks and how valuable a quarterback on a rookie scale contract is. Russell Wilson had it, of course, because he wasn't a first round pick, but he certainly was. That was valuable. You were able to pay some of your star players in your secondary and then hold off on that big deal contract for Wilson a little bit down the road. And you thought that you could get that from Josh Rosen, and now you end up absorbing a lot of the bonuses that he has already received as being a first-round quarterback. You're basically paying the bulk of his contract and sending him away,
right,
and the Miami Dolphins kind of benefiting from the fruits of that labor instead. It's interesting. You would have thought that you would have been able to get that just because of how valuable that contract is and how, Rosen, it was tough to compare him to this year's rookie class to where he probably would have vied to be the top quarterback in this class. If he had waited and played at UCLA one more year. I mean, it's just kind of interesting that you ended up getting a late second-round pick. Of course, you get a burner in Andy Isabella with the selection, but it was a tough pill to swallow because not only are you paying the bonuses for Josh Rosen, and then also you're paying the leftover money on Sam Bradford's contract and the leftover money on Mike Glennon's contract. So it's about $18 million in dead money that they're paying at the quarterback position. Sure, you'll be able to kind of still build around Kyler Murray. You got the 4 years plus the fifth-year option to where he's affordable. That's another strike against Steve Keim as far as drafting in the first round. You can't say, hey, Josh Rosen was a successful pick. Sure, you didn't spend too much to trade up to get the 10th overall selection, and you take Rosen. That's a swing and a miss. That he's right up there with Robert Nkemdiche. He's right up there with Hassan Reddick. Right up there with Jonathan Cooper. Just guys that were selected in the first round that haven't been impact makers. DJ Humphries, another name there.
Well, I wonder what's going on here with Kyler Murray and how down John the John Madden game is on Murray, because he got a lower ranking than Josh Rosen had coming out in his rookie season, and Murray goes number 1 overall.
Yeah, it's to me that's a little disrespectful. I know it's silly. It's a game. I think to me I think it's Madden taking an opportunity to take. Hey, we have an easy target, number 1 pick, a guy that, some people can actually make the argument that, sure, he could be a 73. But for the most part, I think that's kind of I don't think they would have done that to really any other quarterback. But they took it as an opportunity to get clicks and kind of get some attention for the video game franchise, because you're right. Josh Rosen was a 78. Lamar Jackson was a 79. It's just, to me, I mean, Kyler Murray's athleticism enough should have him at least, 75-ish? I don't know. It could be just wasting time arguing about something that really doesn't mean that much. But I don't know. I just think that was unfair. I thought the rating was not merited for the type of player that Kyler Murray is.
Bo, I got to be honest with you. I love the idea of the Madden franchise trying to get clicks by arbitrarily lowering the rankings of Cardinals rookies. Don't you think it'd be smarter if they wanted to make headlines to maybe downgrade players that NFL fans have heard of?
No, I mean, because they can do it. They can do it harmlessly to the rookie guy, right? I mean, if they did it to somebody, sure, like an Antonio Brown or somebody that's been in the league, I mean, there might be more of a fuss. There might be more of a. I just think that this was an easy target, somebody that they could take advantage of and not have that big of repercussions as far as that's concerned. Kind of like a year ago we were talking about how Madden had scrubbed Colin Kaepernick from its rosters, right? I mean, that was something that they might have done maybe if they wanted to just kind of conjure up a little, just some eyes on the franchise, on the video game franchise.
Give Kyler Murray a 79 and it all goes away. Come on.
It goes away. Nobody's talking about it, right? He's right up there with the same with the class from last year, right? I mean, he's right up there with the Josh Allens and the Lamar Jacksons, right where I think he deserves to be.
Well, we've sufficiently covered the quarterback position. Let's talk about running backs, because you talk about all the guys that are still being paid as quarterback. You guys paid David Johnson. He's on a long-term deal now, and I can't necessarily disagree with it, but I kind of felt like he wasn't used properly in the offense last season. Now with Cliff Kingsbury at the helm, do you think that's going to change?
Yeah, you would absolutely hope so. And for me, when I look at this offense, that the pressure is now on David Johnson. He no longer has the ability to say, hey, Mike McCoy or Byron Leftwich or Steve Wilkes or whoever it was that's decision-making was misutilizing David Johnson. He no longer has that crutch to kind of fall back on. And now the pressure's on DJ to kind of earn some of that money that he signed late off season, I should say, in 2018 as they went into the season. I just think that DJ, he came off, it wasn't a leg injury in 2017. It was a wrist injury, but he missed basically all but a few plays of that year. And he came back and he didn't look the same. Even when he had opportunities, even when he had open space or holes to run through, you didn't see 31 like you saw in 2016 when he had the 20 touchdown, nearly 1,000 receiving and rushing season. To me, the pressure's on David Johnson this year to perform. And a lot of people, there's some misconceptions about Cliff Kingsbury's offense that he's just going to pass. When you look at things, it was more like on average, last season in particular, he went 44-36 to pass to rush ratio as far as the plays were concerned. So he does run the football. And then David Johnson, we all know that he's a weapon out of the backfield catching the football. He's as good a route runner as there is at the running back position. So they can utilize him in the pass game. And for a guy like Kyler Murray, that's going to be a valuable kind of safety valve to have in David Johnson. So I think it's huge for him to come out of the gates and really kind of show, even if he isn't 2016 David Johnson, he has to show that he's at least a little bit of that guy that they thought he was to sign to that big extension.
Now, with that 2017 injury history, is there any concern about depth at the position at running back?
It is interesting. I was talking to my co-host for Locked On Cardinals, Alex Clancy. He's somebody that believes that there are a couple names out there in Jay Ajayi or some veteran running backs on the market that the Cardinals should kick the tires on. And it's just such a young man's position. And you look at what happened with the Seahawks last year, where they had the rotation. They utilized the first round pick in Penny. They have a guy like Mike Davis. They have a third running back, and it's kind of a running back by committee. And it's still some fresh legs back there. There aren't guys with a lot of mileage on the tires, right? They're kind of it's a young position. So I think you've got DJ, you've got a fourth round pick in Chase Edmonds that you believe in out of Fordham, a guy that led the FBS at rushing at one point before an injury in his final college season. And then you've got an opportunity to kind of give it to a couple other guys. TJ Logan is more of a special teams guy, but he can be a scat back. So I think you're fine. And running back's one of those positions where even if you suffer an injury or you've got ineffectiveness, you can sign a guy off the street and then kind of employ him right away, and you can find success at the position.
Well, it does seem that way, especially if you have an offensive line ahead of the running back. But do you feel like the Cardinals have done enough in this offseason? We talked about J.R. Sweezy. Also, the Cardinals made that trade for Marcus Gilbert with Pittsburgh. But you didn't really even address the offensive line in the draft until round 6. So right. Did the Cardinals do enough?
Yeah, it's one of those things where this day and age, the modern day free agency, you don't have the players available. You don't have the big time, blue chip offensive linemen hitting the market anymore. The Cardinals actually got away with it a couple of years ago. We mentioned Mikey Potty, right? We mentioned Jared Valdir. Those were guys that you could sign to big money deals and bring in. Now, if you're worth anything and you're coming off, a rookie contract, teams are smart enough. They're savvy enough to lock you into a big time contract and extension where they're not hitting the open market. So the Cardinals are kind of left with this trash heap, right? Not necessarily trash heap. I mean, there's guys like Sweezy that hit the market, and Justin Pugh last year. Justin Pugh is a guy that, just like David Johnson, has to kind of earn the big contract that he signed the previous year. Justin Pugh has to stay healthy enough, which is tough for guys, especially playing that position. But Pugh needs to earn his pay. J.R. Sweezy, I think I like that addition. DJ Humphries is a guy that hasn't been healthy his entire career that you're going to rely at the left tackle position. The one move I did like, especially at the tackle position, is the Cardinals with that number one waiver priority when the Browns decided to just cut bait on a guy like Desmond Harrison, who started half the games for him at left tackle last year. He's young, he's controllable. If he, for whatever reason, doesn't fit in, you can just cut him, and it's just a low risk, maybe a mid-level reward. He can back up a guy like DJ Humphries if things aren't working out, if he's not healthy or if he's ineffective. Corey Cunningham was a late draft pick in 2017, played sparingly last year. I think he's raw. He's a guy, adds some depth for you. Another guy they added this offseason was a guard, Max Garcia, comes over from Denver. I think he's a plug-and-play guy, but Mason Cole was a guy who's kind of interesting, and the center position is for whatever reason, it's up for grabs, and they want to keep A.Q. Shipley, who was lost to a torn ACL, a guy who's in his 30s, an undersized center. They want to have a position battle where Mason Cole was drafted out of Michigan in the third round in the 2018 draft. I think he's your no doubt, no-brainer guy that you want to develop a rapport with Kyler Murray at the center position. But for whatever reason, they're going to battle this one out. But Shipley could add some versatility to that line. There's versatility on this line. You mentioned Marcus Gilbert. I just think that they have the makings of an improved line, but it's tough it's tough to not improve after last year's bad performance. Is it something? Are they going to be a wrecking crew? Are they going to be the Hog Mollies, of the 90s with the Washington Redskins? Absolutely not. But they should be improved. Like I said, I think it's a lot like a bullpen, to where any given year guys can kind of fall off a cliff and guys can have career years. It's really tough to kind of predict how things are going. I mean, we were talking about the Cowboys having such a strength at the offensive line a couple of years ago, and then it became a liability for them at times. So it's just one of those things. Who knows? I mean, and staying healthy is a big key for any offensive line. So you never know.
Well, and that's been a big part for a lot of these players on the Cardinals line, is staying healthy. I mean, Humphries, how many injury issues has he dealt with over the years?
Yeah, and it's been those leg injuries that he's suffered, and it's the rigors of playing in the NFL, right? But it's one of those things. Last year, I thought that the Cardinals were relying too much on some guys that were oft injured. Sure, you had DJ Humphries at the most important tackle position, but then you brought in Pugh, a guy that finished the year on the IR, both back-to-back seasons with the Cardinals last year and the Giants in the previous season. You had Andre Smith that was oft injured. He came over from Cincinnati, and you were just sitting there and relying on these guys that just had a track record of just not staying healthy. And it's tough to predict injuries, but these guys had made it pretty predictable. I don't know. I thought that was a strike against Keim again, but hopefully this year, a guy like Sweezy, who seems like he's pretty consistent. Marcus Gilbert has been a guy that he's kept himself off the playing field with an injury and with a PED violation. So we'll see if Gilbert can be a guy that can play valuable reps at the right tackle position, but we'll see.
Yeah, with Sweezy, he did have his injury. See, he was fine when he was with Seattle. He went to Tampa Bay, and he seemed to have a hard time staying on the field in Tampa, but came back, and I think he only missed a couple games with just some minor injuries with Seattle last year. But that's been something that with Seattle at the guard spots have been dealing with. They bring Upati over. He has an injury history. DJ Fluker at the opposite guard spot, he has an injury history. And so it's definitely a concern when you have those spots and you're filling them with guys that seem to consistently get injured. They might make it majority of the season, but that you're probably going to be without them for about 4 games. And if it's just 4 games here and there, it's not that big of a deal. But if you're missing 4 or 5 games, at multiple spots, that's when it can be tough, especially when you've got a rookie quarterback back there.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, it's as you kind of know and following the Seahawks, and they've drafted at the position and drafted high, and sometimes you hit and sometimes you miss, and you miss bad, and it kind of sets you back because, like we said, as far as the free agent market's concerned, they're just not available. You either have to trade or you have to draft well to really build a successful offensive line. Otherwise, you're really just taking some chances on some guys that probably have a long injury history, and you're just hoping for them to stay healthy and pan out. As far as the quarterback position and how it might help this offensive line this year is Kyler's ability to run and make plays himself, and that Cliff Kingsbury's offense is kind of predicated on getting rid of the football in 2.5 seconds. And if you can't guard for 2.5 seconds, then you've got some serious issues on the offensive line.
Well, and if you're getting rid of the ball in 2.5 seconds, you got to have guys who can get open quickly. Larry Fitzgerald is one of those guys who's been able to do it consistently year after year, and you can just throw the ball up to him and trusting that he's going to be coming down with the ball. You got Christian Kirk coming back for a second year, and then you guys went out and drafted 2 wide receivers early on in the draft. You mentioned Andy Isabella earlier, getting him with that Rosen pick. Taking him 2 spots ahead of the Seahawks when they got DK Metcalf. How did you feel at that spot getting Isabella late in the second round?
For somebody, and I follow the draft and I follow the prospects pretty closely. you saw a name like DK Metcalf, and you were certainly intrigued. And when you saw him there, when the Cardinals went in and got a very little known UMass wide receiver in Andy Isabella, it was kind of head scratching. But it was also a Steve Keim special, right? He loves to go after the small school guys, but it was the pick that you used from trading Josh Rosen. So I was like, there you go. Steve Keim couldn't help himself. But the more I kind of get to know the Andy Isabella story, and you look at the player as far as what he's capable of doing, leading the FBS and in tons of receiving categories, especially yardage, and his athleticism. Sure, he's undersized, he's 5'9", but he runs a 4.31. I mean, that's you got to love that. You got to love the speed that he brings. He seems like he's strong enough, and he can win one-on-one battles, and he can maybe play the slot or take the top off the defense. You would have liked to see the guy like DK Metcalf, but then in the fourth round, they go get kind of a DK Metcalf type playmaker in Hakeem Butler, who I absolutely love that pick in the fourth round, the Iowa State freak of nature wide receiver. I love what Steve Keim did in the draft at the wide receiver position. I think it was just great. It was a slam dunk. You get Isabella, you get Butler, you even take Keyshawn Johnson, a kid out of Fresno State, different spelling than the famous receiver, but he actually arguably had the best offseason camps than the other two guys. And then I thought that kicking the tires on a guy like Kevin White, who's I think a lot of people are deeming a first-round bust from the Chicago Bears. If he has anything, if he can be anything close to what people projected, or even like half of that he adds value to the Cardinals. And this receiving core that was a disaster at this point last year, it was just Fitz, and it was Christian Kirk, and then it was Greg Little, I think, was vying for a spot, who hadn't played valuable downs in the NFL since 2014, and Bryce Butler, who both ended up being cut before the season started. This is a complete overhaul of the wide receiver room, which was necessary. This might be my favorite just room that Steve Keim has kind of retooled or rebuilt this offseason.
Well, a lot of young competition for sure. And I have to wonder, when you look 3 years down the road, it's interesting because the Cardinals, we talked about the receivers that they picked early, and Hakeem Butler, one of those guys where I saw Seahawks fans saying that they wanted him in the first and second round. And he falls all the way to the fourth round. But each of the NFC West teams, between the 49ers, the Cardinals, and the Seahawks, all took receivers pretty early on in the draft. You guys got Isabella and Butler. Seahawks take DK Metcalf in round 2, Gary Jennings in round 4. And then the 49ers get Deebo Samuel in round 2 and Jalen Hurd in round 3. So I'm curious from your perspective, in 3 years from now, which are going to be the two best receivers out of those 6 picks in the division? And maybe you throw Keyshawn Johnson in there too, mentioning his offseason. But, out of those 6, where are you leaning?
Yeah, you know what? I think that the pressure is probably going to be on a guy like Metcalf, right? Because he's actually going to be thrown into a role, I think, this year with Doug Baldwin moving on, that he's going to have to be making plays for the Seahawks. Otherwise, you've got Jerron Brown, the former Arizona Cardinal, and Tyler Lockett, and they're capable of doing it. But I think Metcalf, people envision him being a big-time threat for the Seahawks offense. I could be wrong with that. And then Deebo Samuel is a guy that I think a lot of people, if Jimmy G can stay healthy in San Francisco, he's going to be a big threat right away for Jimmy G. For me, as far as the Cardinals receivers, I think it's possible that Hakeem Butler, if he can get past his case of the drops from his college career, that he can absolutely be a freak. His size, his speed, his athleticism, his jumping ability, being able to win the point of attack and win one-on-ones, that's going to be huge for this offense. And he, with Fitz and Christian Kirk and even Andy Isabella being in this offense, it really does open it up an opportunity for Butler to just kind of stretch the field a little bit and take the top off the defense and kind of really just be narrow focused as far as what he has to do. Down the road, man, it's so tough to project. I got to imagine Samuel is going to be put in the prime spot. So is Metcalf. But I really like the duo that Keim selected as far as Isabella and Butler. I hope all of them are successful. I know that that's probably being too political, but I think as far as the NFC West is concerned, that's exciting because it lacked young playmaking for a while. I mean, you knew what the quarterbacks had to bring. You know what some of the secondaries had to bring. But, yeah, it lacked some offensive firepower for a while. And you like to kind of see it all over the board. And, of course, what's going on in Los Angeles where, they've got Jared Goff and they've got that young group of receivers, and Cooper Kupp coming back, probably going to be healthy here pretty soon, and Brandon Cooks. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how everything plays out.
Yeah, we got some good quarterbacks. We got quite the group of receivers in the NFC West. I'm really curious because if Isabella and Butler can become that guy, because 3 years down the road, Larry Fitzgerald is still going to be playing for the Cardinals, so it's going to be a tough road for them to try and overtake that number one spot.
Yeah, I just don't know if we can take any more speculation. It's like year after year. It's getting to the Brett Favre territory of every year you can mark it on your calendar, in December. We're talking about, is Fitz coming back or not? And then he makes the decision inevitably to come back because he loves getting paid millions of dollars to play the wide receiver spot. And he doesn't have to move, and he can still play at a high level because somehow he's cheated, Father Time. And he's still able to do it. Just as now I think it's gonna. He's at the age where he's gonna be around 36. Is he gonna be able to make up for the lack of playmaking ability at the quarterback position? Hopefully, Kyler Murray can make up for that. But if he can't, you can just add Murray to a long list of guys who just couldn't get it done and get Fitz the ball. But he's still got his numbers.
Now, give Larry Fitzgerald 10 more years in the league. That way he can run down Jerry Rice. Somebody has to do it.
It is incredible. But, it was so bad last year as far as the offense was concerned that Fitz, you thought that he had very attainable numbers or chances at the number 2 spot overall as far as, receiving is concerned and passing Tony Gonzalez. But it was so bad and so feeble from the quarterback position with Rosen and the play calling that Fitz couldn't get there, but I think he'll have a similar season as he did last year, but it will look different. I think it'll be a more impressive 700 plus yards, maybe 60 plus receptions for a guy like Fitz compared to last year, where it looked more trying because of the lack of play and experience at the quarterback position.
Well, I just know that he's going to catch a couple touchdowns on the Seahawks no matter what. It's going to happen. And I can't even be mad about it because Larry Fitzgerald is one of those players that you can't not like him, even right. If he's on a rival team.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, he's just a guy that's done it with class, and he's the pro's pro. And even a guy like Richard Sherman for all those years, now he's with San Francisco, but all those years they had the battles between Fitz and Sherman, and the respect that the two had for each other was great to watch on Sundays. But yeah, Fitz has just done it at a high level, and you pull for a guy. I mean, he had the huge play in the Super Bowl that put the Cardinals on the top at that point, and he left the field leading in a Super Bowl. But unfortunately, Ben Roethlisberger and Santonio Holmes made a play, and Fitz that will probably be the closest he's ever going to come to a ring. But man, you can't take anything away from him, and you really have to take in consideration who was throwing the football. But you also have to consider that Palmer's probably a fringe Hall of Famer as far as his numbers are concerned, and then Kurt Warner played at a high level and earned himself a gold jacket throwing Fitz the football as well. So he had some good ones mixed in there with some really bad quarterback play.
You bring up Carson Palmer, and this is one of my big beefs of the offseason. I see that he's going to be inducted into the Cardinals Ring of Honor.
Yeah,
what's going on there?
It's pretty interesting. I'm actually one of the few that believe that that's it's necessary. I think that as you turn the page from a brutal season in 2018, that you need to celebrate some of the successes that this franchise had. Not even around when they went to the Super Bowl and it was Warner, it was Fitz, it was Bolden, it was Darnell Dockett. You need to celebrate when the team was good recently. And Carson Palmer, when you look at his numbers, they are exactly the same. They are eerily similar to Kurt Warner when he was with the Arizona Cardinals, and Warner had his number retired. Warner went one more step than Palmer did. He lost in the Super Bowl as Cardinals quarterback. Palmer made it to the NFC Championship game. But as far as wins, Palmer had way more wins overall. They had about this. I think there was a game difference between starts. I think Palmer made one more start. And as far as passing yardage is concerned and touchdown passes, they are right there with each other. So I think that you need to celebrate some of your successes. You're not some of the great franchises of all time. You're just not one of those teams that has just this huge history that you can kind of hang your hat on. The Cardinals have to start building something, and Palmer was a part of that. And hopefully they can kind of get back to even the success that Palmer had under center for the Cardinals.
Well, see, maybe my problem with it is that Matt Hasselbeck still isn't in the Ring of Honor for the Seahawks. and the idea that Carson Palmer, a 5-year player for the Cardinals, is going to get into the Cardinals Ring of Honor ahead of a long-term quarterback like Matt Hasselbeck was for the Seahawks.
Sure.
It just rubs me the wrong way.
But it's grading on a curve, right? I mean, you've had some quarterbacks there. You had Jim Zorn for a long time. Of course, you've got Russell Wilson.
Dave Craig, a long-time quarterback.
Absolutely.
So we've had guys for a long term. But I mean, the Cardinals franchise has been around for a while too.
It has, but I really, I think it's silly sometimes and they've done it too. They've done it recently. I think as recent as the last 2 years. They've retired a guy who's played either for the Chicago Cardinals or the St. Louis Cardinals, and it just doesn't resonate with these fans who are in the Phoenix metropolitan area. I think that you have to celebrate somebody that they witnessed, that they went and watched, each and every Sunday be successful playing the game. Should Palmer have been? I think the argument probably is, should Palmer have been inducted before a guy like Anquan Bolden? I think Q probably had a bigger stake to having his name in the Ring of Honor before Carson Palmer. But then, it's a quarterback maybe versus a wide receiver, and you probably always go quarterback over wide receiver.
And then when do you put Emmitt Smith in?
Oh, gosh. See, that's what why the franchise is probably doing this, is because before that, it was just kind of a place where guys would go hang on, and the only time that they could sign free agents is when they were past their prime, and that might be a main example of why a guy like Carson Palmer is going into the Ring of Honor.
Well, let's move on to the defense for the Arizona Cardinals. Well, I guess we kind of skipped over tight ends. You guys did bring in Charles Clay, Max Williams, and drafted Caleb Wilson. So it's going to be quite a different look at tight end on offense as well.
Yeah, we'll see what if Kingsbury decides to utilize the position more so than it was in the past. It didn't seem like it was a position last year that McCoy, Wilkes had any interest in really, pumping up. Ricky Seals-Jones is a guy that's still in that tight end room, and people are intrigued by his athleticism. But he was a guy that, kind of fell short of some expectations in 2018. He was a guy that went from practice squad to kind of making a splash in 2017. But I think he's probably not going to reach the heights that some people envision him getting to. But it's an improved room. Clay has a veteran presence coming over from Buffalo. Ricky Seals-Jones has the ability to make some big plays from the position. And then Max Williams, who knows, maybe just kind of kicking the tires on a guy that festered out a little bit in Baltimore after being selected pretty high out of Minnesota. So we'll see. I don't know if Cliff Kingsbury necessarily, with all the weapons he has between his running backs and his wide receivers, if there's enough balls to go around for the tight end to make a big impact.
Well, some big news in the offseason with regard to the Cardinals defense. You mentioned earlier the Jordan Hicks signing from the Eagles. That was the big 4-year, $34 million deal for Hicks. And then probably the other most notable news in the offseason, Patrick Peterson suspended for the first 6 games. And of course, you draft Byron Murphy in the second round out of the University of Washington. I know that burns a lot of Seahawks fans. And then you got Robert Alford, who you mentioned, bringing him in from Atlanta. And do you think by the time week 4 rolls around and you face Seattle, is it going to be, do you envision that being Alford and Murphy being the starting 2 corners?
Yeah, you would certainly hope so. Murphy was a guy that a lot of people felt was the best corner in the draft, right? And he comes, and he also has some local connections. He went to high school. He grew up in the Phoenix area, actually in Scottsdale. Then he ends up going and starring at UW in the college ranks. He certainly has the athletic ability to play and start at the cornerback position in the NFL level. Is it too soon? Probably, right? I mean, that's a big – I mean, when you look at their schedule, it's kind of favorable for a rookie corner. I mean, you go against the Lions. Sure, Matt Stafford he has the ability to throw the football, but, does he have the weapons anymore? Are they a team that's going to be airing it out like they did previously? No, I think that they're going to be more of a Kerryon Johnson offense. The Ravens is week 2. You know what they feature? They're a run-first offense. Right. And then the Panthers, who knows what's going to happen with Cam Newton and his shoulder. They're a run-first team. And then, the Seahawks. I mean, obviously Russell Wilson threw for, 35 touchdowns last year, but they were a team that ran the football. So it might not be that bad early on as far as Murphy getting tested, and he'll be able to kind of acclimate in the first couple of weeks. By the time Russell Wilson rolls around, and his ability to just cut up defenses like he did by setting up the run game like they did last year, and how efficient he was, that will be interesting to see. But I thought that Keim did an okay job. I mean, I don't think he anticipated Peterson doing this. I know there was rumblings that Peterson went to Keim asking for deferred money to make up for his suspension, and I'm glad that they didn't accommodate that. But and that soap opera needs to kind of end, and I hope that the PED violation and suspension is something that humbled a guy who is usually pretty humble, but he had a couple hiccups last year, Patrick Peterson did, where he had, the trade request that went very public.
Right.
And then also, he rescinds the trade request. He's at the local PGA golf tournament, which is huge in Phoenix, and he pretty much says, I want to be a Cardinal for life. And then he takes to social media before the draft, basically saying that he wants out again. And then the PED violation came, and it's just like, okay, dude, you have to kind of reassess things, because you're kind of now putting yourself in a position you're taking yourself off the playing field, and you're costing yourself game checks and the ability to potentially go to your ninth straight Pro Bowl to start a career, which would be incredible. But that's going to be a huge void to fill. I mean, Patrick Peterson is a mainstay at that CB1 position for the Cardinals, and that's going to be a tough void to fill. I think another UW alumni in Budda Baker, who plays the safety position, needs to step up, though, to really become a force in that secondary to make up for the loss of Patrick Peterson. And Alford, Tremaine Brock is a savvy vet. He's played in the division. I think they're certainly capable of surviving and kind of treading water before Peterson comes back. But it's a huge hole. It's a huge hole. It would be a huge hole for any team to fill.
Yeah, Brock playing most of his career with the 49ers, been around about 10 years, and then bounced around, I think, to the Vikings and the Broncos the last couple of years. So he's back in the division. And how are you feeling overall about the secondary then? You mentioned Budda Baker, and that's another guy that University of Washington Huskies fans are familiar with. And then you got Swearinger back on the team too.
Right, yeah, it was kind of a gift from the Washington Redskins late last season. On Christmas, they decided to just waive him, and the Cardinals, with that top waiver priority, bring back Swearinger, who had success with the Cardinals a couple of years ago. And I like the addition. I think that he's a locker room guy that adds kind of some fire. Sometimes it's not necessary, but sometimes you need a guy that's just going to ruffle the feathers and be a little irrational as far as what he's upset about or what he wants to get going, because it was almost too tame the last couple seasons. I like what Swearinger brings to the table. He's a guy that knows how to play the position, and couple that with a very athletic Budda Baker and your safeties. I like the safeties compared to the rest of the NFC West. I think that it's very talented. As far as the corners, we went over it. I mean, I think Alford he's a pro. He's a guy that played at a pretty decent level in Atlanta, and his price tag was too much for them to accommodate, given extensions to guys like Julio Jones and Matty Ice. And I think that this secondary it's a good mix of veterans and young guys. And when Peterson comes back, it can be very good. It can be exceptional. And the defense suffered a lot from the inability to stay on the field from the offense last year. That's got to change as well.
Well, looking at linebacker now, you guys switched from were you a 4-3 the previous year under Wilkes, and then switching to a 3-4 now, or was that change made a couple years back?
No, you're right. It was one of those head scratchers where when Wilkes was brought aboard and they had the personnel, and under the BA era, this team was a 3-4, and they actually were very successful running the 34 defense. But Wilkes stubbornly employed the 43 defense, and it was an absolute utter failure as far as especially stopping the run. This team is getting back to something that they were successful at before Wilkes. They brought over Vance Joseph, who was the failure of a head coach in Denver, but he's had success as far as being a ball-hawking defense. You've seen it in Miami, and you'd seen it previously when he was a secondary coach with the Bengals. I think he's a good fit. I think he's a good veteran presence for a young head coach, and them getting back to the 34 is just huge, especially when you look at their personnel. And guys like Chandler Jones, they can get back to standing up, and he can get back to really in continuing to have the success that he's had rushing the passer.
Well, Chandler Jones, it definitely felt like he had a drop-off of a season last year. And then at linebacker, too, you got Hassan Reddick going into his third year, pairing him with Jordan Hicks then on the inside. And then you mentioned Terrell Suggs, that going into what is his 17th season now, and also picked up, a veteran guy like Brooks Reed from the Falcons, who, he's just kind of one of those veteran guys that kind of seems like he would be able to fit in anywhere. Yeah,
that's right. And it was key for this team. You mentioned Chandler Jones. He didn't have the 17-plus sacks that he had the previous year in 2017, but he had 13. That would be fine if the rest of the guys were getting after the quarterback as well, but it was basically Chandler Jones with 13, and then everybody else was just it was a huge drop-off as far as getting after the quarterback. Robert Nkemdiche had 4.5, and a couple other guys with 4 and a couple guys with 3. They just didn't get after the quarterback. And they had, 7 interceptions as a group, too, last year. They just weren't getting after the quarterback. They weren't forcing turnovers. They were just a non-factor on defense with a struggling offense. It was just a bad mix. Brooks Reed's a guy that knows how to get after the passer. Terrell Suggs certainly knows how to do it, even if he's a shell of himself. And then we'll see what happens with that the linebacking core, adding Jordan Hicks. And Hassan Reddick, I think at some point, has to take a major step. As you mentioned, it being a little later in his career now, he doesn't have the luxury of saying, hey, I'm a rookie, I'm making a position change. He's got to step up and play like a first-rounder at some point. And one guy I kind of glazed over in the secondary that I'm excited about is Deontay Thompson, who they drafted out of Alabama.
Right.
I think that he'll add to that secondary as well.
Yeah, he fell pretty far. A lot of people picking him to go early on in the draft, goes all the way down to round 5.
Mm-hmm. And I thought it was a good job by Keim just selecting the best player available at the time. And I think Thompson can add to this secondary in his first year right away.
Well, one guy drafted earlier in the draft for the Cardinals was on the defensive line with Zach Allen. And you put him with guys like Darius Philon from the Chargers. You got him for 2 years, $10 million. Of course, you got Corey Peters, Rodney Gunter coming back. Right. And you mentioned Nkemdiche, and he's an interesting guy, a guy who also slipped in the draft all the way to the bottom of round 1. And it kind of feels like he's never really lived up to that potential that a lot of people saw in him. And maybe some of the character concerns are staying with him that allowed him to fall so far in that first round.
Yeah, I think the most interesting things about Robert Nkemdiche are not his ability or his, it's football. He just doesn't, he doesn't strike me as a guy that's a football first, second, or third guy. He likes to play, guitar. He likes to write poetry. He got arrested recently for a warrant driving
his hobbies.
Not necessarily a hobby, but it's just one of those things where he's clearly not taking care of what he needs to take care of to stay in the good graces of the franchise. The franchise didn't pick up his 5th-year option, so it's basically like he's not an addition by subtraction. So even with the arrest during mandatory minicamp, it wasn't even going to be a big move if the team decided to cut ties with Nkemdiche. It just wasn't going to factor in either way. Unfortunately, he's just been a guy that just hasn't had an impact on this franchise. I get why they selected him where they did. That was the team that was coming off the NFC Championship game. They ended up making a move, trading a second-round pick for Chandler Jones. So they brought in the pass rusher that everybody thought they needed, and then you thought that you were adding this top 10 talent that fell late in the first round right in your lap as far as Nkemdiche is concerned. And he unfortunately just didn't pan out. I get the selection. And if you look at the guys that were selected around him, there really wasn't anybody that was worthy of taking over a guy like Nkemdiche. Even if you wanted to use hindsight as 2020, I think the pick had to be made. Unfortunately, it was just one of those that didn't pan out.
How are Cardinals fans feeling about Zach Allen with that third round pick?
He's a guy that's got a high motor, and he's a guy that came out of Boston College with I think a lot of people think he can kind of be cut from that cloth of those. He doesn't play the same position as a Luke Kuechly, but he's just one of those gym rat kind of likable guys out of the same alumni at the same school that they play hard. They play as hard as they possibly can, even though they might not be as athletically gifted as some maybe more talented players. But he's going to find a role as far as this defense is concerned, and there's certainly opportunity for that. I mean, we went through the guys, as you just mentioned, Peters, Kandichi, if he can get healthy, Rodney Gunter. I mean, that defensive line was maybe kind of the lost group during this offseason turnover that wasn't really addressed. I do like the addition of Darius Philon, but as far as his impact, it's probably going to be more than you'd like to see from Philon, or more that's going to be you're going to ask a lot from Philon, who I don't know if he's up to the challenge to deliver at the interior of that defensive line.
Yeah, I think he's one of those run stopping middle of the line type guys, and
sure.
And he was a guy that I think Seahawks fans looked at because, as a team needing help on the defensive interior, he's going to give you that. So out of some of the younger players, whether it be offense or defense, who do you see who, was kind of there last year, but you really expect to make the leap in 2019?
I mean, it has to be, for me, Hassan Reddick has to make the leap.
Yeah.
Also expecting big things for a guy like Budda Baker. Two guys from the same draft, guys that have all the athletic ability that you want. Budda was traded up for in the second round to be selected out of Washington. They passed on, potential quarterback fits, planning for the future of the position. Instead, they take Budda Baker, who they thought they could just plug and play. And he's been great on special teams, but a second rounder, the expectations for him were that he was going to come out and he was going to make an impact. He was going to be kind of a honey badger light. And he's a guy that really hasn't done much. He doesn't have any interceptions in his first two seasons. You want to see that change. You want to kind of have him have that ball hawking mentality at the safety position, kind of like Matthew did. So you got to see steps from both of those guys coming out of the same draft and kind of make an impact. Even if it isn't what you first expected from those two guys, is going 13th overall and a guy that you traded up for in the second round. It's important for those guys, just for their careers, to have success, especially with one of your leaders being out for the first 6 games in Patrick Peterson. And then, I think the expectations are already built in for a guy like Jordan Hicks with the contract that he signed. But for the young guys like Reddick and Baker, it's important. This is a big year for them.
Well, you mentioned Budda Baker and his role on special teams. How is special teams for the Cardinals? Now you have Andy Lee, so it feels like the punter position's locked up.
Right.
Any concerns outside of punter?
No, and you know what? I've been doing this kind of the last couple of weeks with our Locked On Cardinals podcast. Each day or each show, we're taking different position groups or different phases in the game, and we're pitting them up against the rest of the NFC West. And I think that the Rams and the Seahawks are right there neck and neck with as far as teams are concerned. And then you look at the Cardinals and the Niners, and as a group, including your kicker, your punter, and your returners, the Cardinals are at the bottom. Probably just because Robbie Gould doesn't want to play for the Niners and that position's in flux.
Right.
The Cardinals get a slight edge, but it's not much, unfortunately. You're right. There is some consistency, some continuity with a guy like Andy Lee, who's just been great, who took over position. And unfortunately, the guy that you talked to, Drew Butler, was a 4-letter word for a while at that position. I think that Lee has added some consistency to the punting unit. Zane Gonzalez is a big question mark going forward. He was great in college, played at Arizona State. He added some consistency to the Sun Devils kicking game that we hadn't seen for a long time, but he hasn't done it at the pro level. He hasn't done it at the NFL level. That transition from kicking the 30-plus yard PAT, he struggled with that. And as far as his field goal accuracy, it hasn't been where it needs to go. So we'll see if he can get it done. So that's a huge question mark. As far as the return game, I mean, kick returns, TJ Logan was solid. Pharaoh Cooper was a guy that they picked up off of waivers from the Los Angeles Rams. He was just a casualty by numbers late last season, and the Cardinals were able to pick him up. And if he makes the roster, I think that he's going to impact the return game. So I like what they've done there. I think that they've got guys that are capable of making an impact in the return game. So I think their special teams has been improved. It's definitely an improvement from the Bruce Arians era. So I think that that's one area, one facet that they can be successful in.
I hope Cooper doesn't make the team because I feel like Pharaoh Cooper is always crushing the Seahawks for whatever reason.
That's right. He's just crushing the NFC West. I mean, he was a guy that I think he led the NFL in kick return yardage average with over 27 per return in 2017. So he's definitely a weapon at that position. And TJ Logan's pretty good as well. So we'll see. And there's always the threat of Patrick Peterson when he's off suspension to go back there and field a punt. And he's dangerous anytime he's back there.
Well, you did mention that as part of Locked On Cardinals that you guys have been breaking down position by position within the NFC West and ranking all of the teams. And so I think there's a lot of value for any, Seahawks fan, 49ers fan to go ahead and tune into Locked On Cardinals just to get that piece of the offseason from you guys. But I can bet one ranking that you guys aren't, or at least you haven't considered. And I want you to consider it right here on the show, Bo. And that is the fact that the NFC West, we clearly have the best looking coaches in the entire NFL. So I want you to rank the most handsome coaches in the NFC West.
This is tough. And I think that the Cardinals do deserve credit for bolstering that this offseason. Steve Wilkes was clearly the weak link.
He was the odd man out for sure. You got to get rid of him.
I mean, you got the silver fox up there and Pete Carroll and, Shanahan and McVay, you know what they bring to the table. And then there's Cliff Kingsbury. Man, my goodness. That is about the toughest. You're right. That's got to be the toughest ranking I'll do all offseason. Probably, I think you got to give the edge to McVay, unfortunately. I think, unfortunately, the Rams are going to kind of run the table in a lot of areas. So maybe go with McVay. And it might have to do with his bride to be as well. Did he just got married, right?
At least I know I've seen the pictures floating around,
exactly.
And that definitely it does feel like he gets some cachet there.
He sure does. He sure does. She brings him up a notch, and then you've got I think Cliff Kingsbury's in there. I think he's got to be 2.
What?
And then I'm sorry. I mean, maybe call me a homer, but. You've got I think Kingsbury, the guy now with the Cardinals, is number 2, and then you'll go Carroll, and we'll give Kyle Shanahan number 4.
I think maybe Shanahan does deserve the bottom spot there, but I think if you watch Kingsbury close enough, he just has a little bit of a wonky eye that I think Carroll has to edge him out over that, even though Carroll has that broken nose. So
what they need to do is they need to move the post-practice press conferences out of the sun, because that's what's doing it. I know exactly what you're talking about.
It's the one eye squint, and that's what's throwing me off. Okay.
What they can do to really improve things is just make it poolside and make shirts optional, and you'll be right up there, I think.
There we go. Well, okay, now that we got that order out of the way, how about we pick the order of the NFC West that you see the division finishing in this year?
Yeah, I think that's unfortunately pretty easy to pre-predict. I guess. I mean, there is always the wild cards, and there's always the teams that come out of nowhere and go worst to first. I don't think that's the case here. There's a lot of talented players coming back for both the Seahawks and the Rams, and they're gonna duke it out. I really think they're going to duke it out for the top of the division. As far as the Cardinals and the Niners are one of those two teams going to take a step that not a lot of people are anticipating. I think that the Cardinals aren't going to be judged as far as wins and losses this season. It's not so much, maybe more on the development of Kyler Murray and those wide receivers and Cliff Kingsbury at the head coaching position. There's not going to be the pressure of going 10-6 and making the playoffs in your first year. It's as much as I think that the Cardinals did enough to improve, it's not enough to improve. If they can get to 6 wins this year, that's going to be an improvement.
Okay.
And I think that might be enough to edge out the Niners. I still don't think the Niners have done enough. There's still some question marks from Jimmy G coming back from that ACL tear. Plus, they really didn't address their secondary. They're going to have a very decent pass rush, but I still don't see enough playmaking ability on either side of the ball from the Niners to really ruffle some feathers in this division.
Oh, man, I hope there's some 49ers fans listening. Kyle Shanahan last in the division in looks among coaches, and 49ers last in the division when it comes down to it. I like that.
I also mentioned that there was the only two of the 3 wins that the Cardinals got last year. The Cardinals haven't not lost to the 49ers since Jim Harbaugh was the head coach.
Oh, my gosh.
That's a stat. They're 8-0 against the 49ers the last 8 times they've played. That includes the Shanahan era, in the short-lived Chip Kelly and Jim Tom Sewell eras. Isn't that incredible?
That is an incredible stat. We had a good run going for Seattle until we lost that game, which you're welcome, getting the number one pick for the Cardinals because the Seahawks lost to the 49ers, but I guess they still got their guy anyway.
They did, and I don't think it would have changed anything as far as the draft is concerned. No. I think Nick Bosa probably goes number one in that scenario then. Okay,
so Rams and Seahawks battling it out for number two. Who you giving the edge to?
Oh, man, and I don't want to go chalk, and I think that maybe there's some, as far as the Rams, they've got some pretty key exits as far as Ndamukong Suh and some guys aging, and Aqib Talib in the secondary. We'll see if Cooper Kupp can return from that injury, but that offense is still a force to be reckoned with.
Okay, but wait. Let me make this easier for you. If you pick the Rams over the Seahawks, I am never inviting you back on the show.
I mean, do you think it's that obvious? Do you think that the improvements were made from Seattle to make the jump in the regular season, of course, to kind of narrow the margin? I know Baldwin wasn't much of a factor last year just because he was battling injuries most of the season, and Russell Wilson's done it with less before. Man, and to me, it's so tough to make that decision. I mean, just for the sake of coming back on the show in the future, I'll give the edge to the Seahawks because I think down the line, I think it's going to be such a battle that I'm not going to look too dumb for predicting either one of the teams.
Well, I'm going to have to think about that, Bo, because it was enough hemming and hawing that I'm going to have to consider my position of whether or not you're welcome back. But I really do want to thank you for coming on, breaking down the Cardinals offseason and previewing the 2019 season, spending so much time doing it. Be sure and check out Locked On Cardinals. Check out Bo on Twitter. Where can they follow you there?
Yeah, the easiest way to find it is just type in your search Bob Brack, and it's my name, Bo Brock. But it's spelled out Bob Rack, and you'll just find me on Twitter, and you'll find some scalding hot Arizona Cardinals football takes on there.
Nice. Well, once the season starts, week 4, we're going to be looking for you to be able to, to have a little fun on Twitter.
Wonderful. Can't wait. Looking forward to it.
Appreciate it, Bo. And thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate it.
Thanks once again to Bo for coming on and breaking down the Cardinals offseason. And as we finish up these interviews each week, I thought maybe this would be a good spot to talk about any breaking news with regard to the Seahawks, but not a lot to discuss from this past week. And really the one big news item, which is the passing of Ken Behring. I'm going to jam that right into my Better at Life than Skip Bayless this week. And not necessarily for Behring as the owner of the Seahawks, the former Seahawks owner who tried to move them down to Southern California. But one of the things that I did find out was that after the time he sold the team around the year 2000, he founded the Wheelchair Foundation. And that organization has given away around 1 million wheelchairs in more than 150 countries in the world. And Behring was also the founder of the Water Leaders Foundation in 2005, which was a nonprofit group that had the goal of providing access to safe drinking water. So after Behring's time in Seattle, he went on to do some philanthropic things around the world. And it was interesting to hear about how the Water Leaders Foundation came about, because it was actually an effort that came about because he found that in providing the wheelchairs to people, that oftentimes it was those people who had lost their mobility as a result from unclean water that led to an illness or disease that left them bound to a wheelchair. So for Ken Behring, who passed away this week at the age of 91, better at life than Skip Bayless. And I'm sure that there were probably a few people who were expecting the U.S. women's team to be a lock for the better at life position, but I couldn't put them there yet. I'm holding that spot for the women's team after they got the 2-1 victory over England. Now that they're going on and facing the Netherlands this weekend, I'm counting on them to have that spot locked up for next week's better at life spot. So don't let me down. And it is the first show of the month, so I want to close out the show by thanking all of our supporters at $12 and above who donate at getintheflock.com or via seahawkerspodcast.com/support. We've gotten multiple offers throughout the offseason to join networks who want to put ads in the show, but it's because of all of you that make it so easy to say no. We're good. We've got an amazing audience that supports what we do. So with that said, let's kick off the thank yous, starting with those who have sent in your audio intros at GoHawks@SeahawkersPodcast.com.
Keith Ketover, a.k.a. Flocktimus Prime, University of Cybertron, Little Flockers, roll out.
DCH from Sparks, Nevada, the University of Montana Grizzlies.
Annalisa Mickelson, a.k.a. Mrs. Doug Baldwin, New York, New York, undergrad, University of North Carolina, Greensboro, graduate school, Brooklyn College.
Eric Trench, rooting for the Seahawks out of Renton, Washington, graduated from Eastern Washington University.
Gary Blum from Chappaqua, New York, and the University of Pennsylvania, your 2016 Pick'em League champion.
Ron Pepper, UNLV Runnin' Rebels, San Francisco, California.
Tickety boo! This here is Hong Kong Hawk, it is, from Hertfordshire Meadows, just north of Chelsea, yeah?
Kevin Stengen, Keene, Texas.
Ella Esparza, Woodway, Texas, Yale University, and Sam Houston State, Eat 'em Up Cats.
Lisa in Seattle.
Sam Sullivan from the wonderful land of Oz, the Fort Hays State University.
Paul from San Diego.
Vincent Parker, Emily Carr, University of Art Design, RN Collective.
Samuel Gelber, NoHo, California.
David Van Cleve, Camas, Washington, home of the Papermakers.
Garrett Strongbanks, Northern Ontario, Georgian College.
Jameson Holman from Murray, Utah, representing Mississippi State University, Hail State, and Go Hawks.
And continuing the list of supporters at 12 and above, got associate producer Dustin Mock, Ross in Eureka, California, Christina in Manassas, Virginia, Summer in Vancouver, Sven in Berlin, Deutschland, James in Linwood, Roe in Federal Way, Becca in Manhattan Beach, California, Hector in Issaquah, Kevin in Snohomish, Young in Anchorage, Tim in Austin, John Paul in Palmer, Alaska, Kathy in Eureka, California, Joshua in London, Brandon in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Christian in Bergen, Norway, John in New York, Pepper in Greenville, South Carolina, Jared in Missoula, Jonathan in Ridgefield, Thomas in the Bronx, Glenn in Sanford, Florida, Keegan in Colorado Springs, John in Pierce, Nebraska, Owen in Ashburn, Ireland, Jeffrey in Kansas City, Kari in Rochester, Jeff in Waddell, Arizona, Brian in Berlin, Connecticut, Mitchell in Roseville, California, Gary in Kaneohe, Hawaii, Eric in Seattle, Tracy in Kaneohe, Hawaii, Connie in Gothenburg, Sweden, Taylor in South Cle Elum, Brian in Sugar Land, Texas, Dean in the Greater Hoctum, Marvin in Riverdale, Utah, Brian in the Greater Hoctum, JC in Billericay, England, Lisa in Kelowna, BC, Scott in Fresno, California, Paul in Minneapolis, Seth in Tacoma, Don in the Pacific Northwest, Eric in Clovis, California, Chris in Spokane, Shannon in Florida, Andrew in Marysville, John in the Greater Hoctum, Shoko in New York, Greg in Seattle, Ryan in Chatham, England, Ben in Wrexham, Wales, and DK in Ferndale. A big thanks once again for everyone supporting this show in the month of July. This is it. Next month that I do this, we'll be into training camp and we'll be kicking off the football season. So stay tuned for these next couple weeks as we'll talk to the rest of our NFC West division rivals. And Oscar with the Better Rivals podcast will be on with me next week. Go Hawks!
Let's go.